person in terms of, how things can be particularly challenging for you and your family, and what sort of things can help as well. So I think it's going to be really interesting for me, and I'm sure for everybody else as well. So some of the questions that we put together are things that I thought it would be useful for other people to understand more about, but also for me as well. So we're covering hopefully quite a range of things. And the first topic that we're going to talk to you about is diagnosis. So you're autistic. What made you go for a diagnosis?
I had no idea that I was autistic, or that there was a word for what I was before my eldest son was diagnosed. So when he was diagnosed at 3 years old, and I can say that from the time we brought him home from the hospital, we knew that there was something else going on there. And my mother-in-law explains it as, Joseph just has his little ways. And those little ways meant nothing to me in terms of like a larger neurodevelopmental thing. I was just like, oh, well, he's particular, who isn't? But as he was getting older, we could see that he was having more trouble coping with the busyness and the loudness of the world. And it became more and more difficult to do things, to go out, to even go to birthday parties, anything like that. It was so very difficult. So my sister, who is a teacher, had seen him flapping his hands. And he was really happy. And she said, that's weird that he's flapping his hands. And I said, no, it's not. It just means he's happy. It just means he's happy. And she said that I think he's autistic. I think you need to get him assessed. So I actually had him assessed in America, not here, because you can pay to go to clinics there. And he spent the whole day with them, and I don't think he'd been there for 15 minutes when they said, yes, he's autistic. So after that, I started to learn a lot about it, right? And there was a very helpful course at the Pines it was the early bird course for when children are diagnosed early on for early intervention. And as my husband and I sat in that course, listening to them talking about what it means to be autistic, he kept looking at me and I kept looking at him like, well, that's just me. Like, that's not, that's just what it is to think and to feel. And we realized then where the autism was coming from, given that it's a genetic thing. So I guess I just thought about it for a long time. And then as time went on, I thought to myself, I need to know. Like, it's all well and good to say, well, yeah, I can see that that's like me and that's like me. But I felt like I needed to have the validation of a diagnosis, of somebody else saying to me, I agree with you. Yes, that is the situation. And it really gave me a lot of confidence to do it.
That's great. And I think your story there in terms of going for a diagnosis, having got a child who's diagnosed, is not unusual at all. I don't know if people watched the recent documentary about the McGuinness family, but certainly that was their experience. Christine McGuinness went for a diagnosis after her children had been diagnosed. So in your case, Carrie,
can I just say, I think that what we found a lot in the online autistic community, most women who are late diagnosed in life, it's because their children have been diagnosed. And they were never considered before because of the diagnostic criteria being what they are. Women as girls weren't considered for that. And so it's only in their children being diagnosed that women start to think, oh yeah, okay, well, that makes sense.
Yeah. And at that point, how old were you?
When I finally got my diagnosis, I was 42. I started asking my doctor about it when I was 40, and it just took me a while to complete the forms, because I don't know if you've ever seen the forms that you have to fill out for requesting diagnosis, but it's deep stuff, and it's asking things like, when did you start to speak? Well, I don't know when I started to speak, and my mother didn't remember, and there are loads of people who aren't going to have family members who would be able to answer that question. So it becomes an exercise in almost like perseverance, or it kind of really tests your resolve to go through it, because it's asking stuff that can be really upsetting, whatever, given what your past history might be. And for me, it just took a really long time, because I felt like every question that was being asked, they were looking for a yes or no answer, and there weren't yes or no answers. It depends. It depends on the situation. And so, and I think that's the one thing that the diagnostic criteria is missing, is this idea that, it isn't that something is always a problem. It just depends on what else is going on. And so I ended up writing, I felt like I was writing a novel. I would, every single question, I would put a star and say, it depends, and then have to write like a sheet of how it actually applied to me, or how I see that applying to me. And it's also really, I don't know if embarrassing is the right word, but, I was going through the paperwork with my husband and saying, I think I need you to tell me how I react in that situation, because I know what I think I'm doing. But so you start to become really, I don't know, not paranoid, but like, I don't know. Do I do that? Do I do that? And the sheets just go on forever. So it's, it took a long time for me to fill that out, because I needed to have the emotional space to do it. And I needed to have the quiet time in my own head to do it. And with two children who are both autistic and ADHD, and working full time and life, it was really hard for me to find the space to sit down and be quiet and just think about it, and to focus on myself, I guess, because I wasn't doing an awful lot of that then. So yeah.
You talked about the fact that your oldest boy had a diagnosis in the States. Was your own diagnosis in the States, or was that in the UK?
That was in the UK. So I had gone to my GP, and I was having a rough time. And I think we're going to talk about this later, but I recognize now that I was in autistic burnout. Although I neither knew I was autistic or that I was burned out, but that's definitely where I was. And I was having a really rough time. And we were trying a bunch of, this antidepressant, that antidepressant, try all the different things. And I said to her, I really just think it comes down to, cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. I'm sure everybody knows about cognitive behavioral therapy. So she wanted me to try that, and I was trying this and trying that. And it came down to the fact that none of those things are set up for an autistic mind. None of the fixes are designed for autistic people. So cognitive behavioral therapy is trying to tell me that I should be enjoying social interaction. Well, I'm never going to enjoy social interaction. Never. It's always going to be stressful. Sometimes it's a little less stressful if I know the people ahead of time and I like them and things like that. But any social situation, even with my best friends in the world, causes me anxiety. And that's not going to change. And so I can't talk myself out of it, But so my GP said to me, the wait list is forever. Is it really worth it? Do you really need to have that? And I said, at this point, I think diagnosis is the only thing that is going to really help me feel like I can start to recenter myself. Like everything just felt so out of control, and I needed something to anchor myself, to start from. And so, yeah, I was 40 when I asked her for the paperwork, but I was 42 by the time I got the diagnosis.
And how did you feel having got that diagnosis?
I started to cry, and because I was so relieved. And I said to the man who was doing it, I said, I feel like I've been seen for the first time, because I think I started to cry. So I think he was concerned that I was upset, but actually what it was that for my entire life, I have known that I'm not getting it, right? Like it's always been, I'm out of sync. I'm just not getting it. I'm not getting what the other people are talking about, or how they're talking about it, or why they're talking about it. And it's always been something where, because it seems like everybody else is doing it, then I'm the problem, right? There's something wrong with me. I'm broken. I spent my whole life feeling like I was broken, and could tell that things were difficult for me that aren't difficult for other people. And in that moment when he said it, I just said, I'm not broken. I'm just different. And it's something that I had said to my son from the time he was 3 years old. And I always said to him, you're just different. But I was never allowed to apply that to myself until I had the diagnosis.
And I think your story of feeling that relief is certainly one that I've heard for both other autistic adults who've had a late diagnosis, but also families who've been waiting for a diagnosis for their child to have that that relief, because it gives that understanding of why some things can be more challenging. So knowing now that you are autistic, sure.
Alison, can I just say, so immediately I was relieved. And then after a period of time, I got angry. I got angry and frustrated and sad and despondent, maybe in some ways, that my life had been so difficult in so many ways. And if I had just had this piece of information, it wouldn't have been that way. And so I think that's very much what has prompted me to get more involved in the community, because I think that we need to start seeing all of the autistic people, not just the ones that meet the 1950s standard of the criteria. And we need to give these people the opportunities that they should be having. Like all the ones that I know I did not have, because I simply didn't understand what was going on with me. And I took myself out of situations that I knew I couldn't cope with, that I might have been able to cope with if I'd had the right information.
Yeah, completely understand that. And knowing now that you are autistic, and autism comes along with both challenges and with strengths, what things, you mentioned social situations, but what else is challenging for you?
I cannot use the telephone. I think I was here for, so I've been in Scotland for 17 years, and I think I only ordered a pizza for myself the first time 2 years ago, because I had to use the telephone to do that. And I was finally put into a situation where it was either order it myself or get no pizza. And I really needed pizza. And so I was able to work my way through and finally call and order a pizza. But any situation where where I have to use the telephone to talk to a stranger, and I can't predict how the conversation will go. Like I can't have a script for myself of they will say this and then I will say this. I find it completely overwhelming. And I can't do it. So the telephone is very, very difficult, which is interesting because as a parent, I have to make phone calls for my children. I have to be the one who calls the pediatrician when things aren't going the way we wanted, or when the GP needs to get involved in something. And so what I have realized is that in those situations when it's down to me, I can do it, but I can't have anything else the rest of the day. I can't plan for anything else the rest of the day, because it's just going to use up everything that I've got.
So social things particularly are really challenging for you, but autism, as as people know, it comes with a huge number of strengths as well. And I know knowing a bit about you, Carrie, that one of your strengths is that you want to support other people to not have the same experiences you had as an autistic adult, but also to make things better for parents who have children who are autistic or are not yet diagnosed as autistic. So I know that that's a huge strength. But if you were to look objectively at yourself, what other strengths would you say that you have?
I think in reflection, I can look back on my life and say one of the greatest strengths that autism has brought to me is my my insistence on the truth. I used to say to people, again, long before I knew I was autistic, I could forgive anything and anybody except for lying. I can't forgive lying. And it enrages me when somebody lies because I don't understand why you would do that. And so it's actually kind of been the fueling force for me in believing in civil rights and also, like human rights are autistic rights, and like there's only one right way to treat people, and it doesn't change depending on who those people are. And I think that that's very common amongst autistic people, this feeling of what is right and what is wrong, and justice is being served or not, and that the justice is different than the law and all of these things. So I think, to make that a shorter answer, I am very invested in political discussions and kind of how they intersect with morality and things like that. And I think that comes from being autistic, because the other people who I was raised around aren't necessarily of the same political beliefs as me. And I think that the difference there is that I don't have an awful lot of gray in that area. There's right and there's wrong. And I can say that has certainly gotten me into trouble in the past. So again, depending on how you look at it, maybe that's a strength, maybe it's not a strength. But I certainly have felt that it's given me power. I have felt empowered by that at least I know that my moral compass is always pointing in the right direction.
I think it's a big strength. It's a really big strength. You mentioned people around you growing up. Just looking back to your childhood, do you think or do you know whether you had any autistic people in your wider family?
Nobody was diagnosed in my family. I think that I can tell, much like I could tell that the autism came from me for my son, I think I know where it came from for me. But interestingly, the stigma around autism has prevented my family from having, I think, productive conversations about that. So unfortunately, there remains this attitude that even the word autistic is actually more a slur than it is an adjective, just an adjective. And when I have tried to talk about it with people in my family, they have gotten upset because they think that I'm being critical as opposed to reflective. And so, yeah, I think I know where it came from, but there's nobody diagnosed other than me and my children. I think that genetically, though, I can see it's there. I just didn't know anybody. I didn't know anybody. I never knew a single person who was autistic until my son was diagnosed. And now I think probably the majority of the people that I know are autistic. And we're the fun ones to hang out with anyway.
Of course you are, and I bet you always were. So growing up, did you feel different to your peers?
Oh, yes. I can remember being in first grade. So that's P2 here. And so I was 6 years old. And I can remember having an argument with one of the popular girls because I felt that her behavior was not, she was not treating people fairly. She was being a bully. And so at 6 years old, I can remember watching this social dynamic of the popular kids. And I think maybe that happens more in America than it does here. Maybe, I don't know, the popular like little cliques of kids. And the girl actually said to me, well, you can be in our group or you can hang out with them, right? Like these are your choices. You can be popular or you can go be with the weirdos. And I was like, well, you're actually not a very nice person and I don't like the way you're treating people. And so that kind of astonished her. I can still remember the look on her face, like, what do you mean? But it was so clear to me. It wasn't, it was just so clear. It wasn't like, oh, I better watch my back or look out for my future social situation. It was like, what you're doing is wrong and I'm not going to be a part of that. And I can remember being in kindergarten, so that's P1, and being sent to another classroom to see if there was milk. Somebody had taken my milk. And I didn't, and I had paid for milk, but I didn't get my milk. And the teacher said, oh, go to the other classroom and see if there are any extras in there. I couldn't do it. I pretended to go. I walked down the hallway a little bit and then turned around and walked back because I could not go into a room that I didn't know to talk to a teacher that I didn't know in a situation that I did not know. It was better for me to not have milk and to tell my teacher that they just didn't have any because I couldn't face it. And I think that, well, you might think those are like kind of isolated incidents. I think they're pretty reflective of somebody who's trying to get along or understand what's going on around them and not being able to cope in kind of specific situations. Yeah. And interestingly enough, in kindergarten, I was in a different school. And the kids in that school had always known me from when we were very, very young. And I got along famously with them. And then we moved, and I was in a different school for first grade. And I think that that kind of shows too that we're a lot more accepting of the people who've always been around us than when somebody new comes in. Because I was just as autistic when I was in kindergarten as I was when I was in first grade, but the reactions that I got were completely different from the groups of kids.
And how about as you moved along through the school, going through puberty and into secondary schools? How was that for you?
It was horrible. It was horrible. And I loved learning and I hated school. I hated the building. I hated the classes. I hated, really, it was all about the social situation. So I was 10 years old and there was a girl in my class. Now, it's important to note, my younger sister is very, very popular. She was always very, very popular and very social. She's 2 years younger than me. So when I was 10 years old, somebody in my class said to me, how can your sister be the way she is and you be the way you are? And I was 10. And that pretty much sums up school. that just right there sums up what school was like. I was desperate to get out of school. I was desperate. I believed all the teen movies that told me that it would be better in college. And that I just needed to get out of the high school dynamic and find the better life that was awaiting me out there. I always felt that I just did not understand what they were talking about. I did not understand what any of them were talking about or why they were talking about it. It all seemed so pointless, all the things that they were doing. And again, I think that's why I was saying it could be a strength or a weakness, that sense of justice. Like, how can you be looking at all of the stuff that is going on around you that is bad, like all of this objectively bad stuff that is going on, and be worried about where you're going out to on Friday night? Like, right? Like there's actual strife. There is strife. And so you're worried about going to the football game? It never made any sense to me. So I think I was ready for the adult world when I was about 8. It took a while to get there, though.
You had to.
I mean, a lot to get through.
So, I mean, obviously you're an autistic female, but you have a house full of males, your husband,
Yep.
2 boys.
Even my dog.
Oh, even the dog. There we go.
Even the dog.
So, what differences do you see between, you know, autistic males and females? And I know you mentioned burnout, and I know masking is a really big thing that is now much more known about in terms of females. It is, you know, what sort of differences do you see gender-wise, and what strategies have you used?
So honestly, I don't think that there are a lot of differences. I think that there is the reason that people think that women and men present differently is because we have such a very narrow perspective on what is autistic behavior or what looks autistic. And that comes from the very narrow, outdated diagnostic criteria of days of old. And so there are certain myths and things, stereotypes around it that, you know, we can all watch The Big Bang Theory, and in whether or not they say it, we know Sheldon is autistic, right? Because he meets our stereotypical criteria of being a boy who's white, who is socially awkward, and gets made fun of for his gaffes. And it's only in expecting everybody to look like that we end up missing people. So I was on a course recently. It was a very good course. It was 6 weeks long, and it was about autism from an autistic perspective instead of from a diagnostic or a medical perspective. And what the person who was running that course said was that women do not experience autism differently. They don't have a different autistic experience. They have a different bias, discrimination experience. So we are not identified because we are women, because we are girls, right? So even if we're displaying the exact same behavior as a boy would be, we're ruled out because, oh, well, it affects more boys than it does girls. But we've kind of made that up. We've created a false metric by which we're judging things. And so to speak specifically about my children, my eldest son is me all over again. He is me all over again. He just happens to be a boy. And there is no difference between the way he's behaving and the way I behaved in primary school, or he's just started secondary school. His experiences of that so far, which have been difficult for him, have been exactly what mine were. And he's reacting to it exactly the way I did. So I don't actually think there is a difference. I think that the problem is that we have blinders on based on and we've trusted the experts in the community to say this is what autistic behavior is, or this is what it looks like, when really it's a much wider scope than that. They just haven't noticed it before. And to get around to masking, and that also comes into it. So I have been told on more than one occasion that I'm not autistic enough to speak for the autistic community. And that, you know, in terms of trying to find your place, trying to find your community, I am neither neurotypical nor apparently autistic enough. So where does that go? And honestly, what I think those people are saying who say that is that I actually am pretty good at masking, because I've had to be pretty good at masking. I developed strategies very early on to help me do that, and to get through. Not enough where I wasn't always considered weird. I think I was always considered weird, but in adult life, I could at least make certain situations work. And I have always found that as soon as I let the mask slip, that's when I have difficulty. That's when things go wrong. That's when I start to feel comfortable enough to be myself, to really be myself around a group of people, they don't like me, or they don't, I'm not who they thought I was because I'm not the mask, right? So masking has a lot of, there's so much in it where you feel like you need it in order to be successful, but that's only because the world is hostile to autistic people. And we haven't actually yet created an environment where we say it's actually okay for you just to be you. When we think about the behavior things that we do, where we're trying to change the way children behave in class, or in social situations, or making them go into social situations, what we're saying to them is, you're not good enough as an autistic person. We need you to learn how to be less autistic. And that's what masking is learning how to look less autistic. And it absolutely leads to burnout, because you can't put all of your energy into projecting a different personality forever and not have a consequence to that. It has an absolutely physical and mental toll to it.
Yeah, that sounds incredibly tough, Carrie, and it's really insightful to hear that, to have that understanding about you and about other autistic people as well. If we move on now to talk about your family, I actually met you with your boys when I think Joseph was probably 3 and Noah would have been 1 maybe, and we
didn't even have Noah yet.
Have no. Oh well, we went to the autism friendly grotto at Dobby's, and it was fantastic, because I know you said it was amazing for Joseph to go in and experience that kind of situation where there was a low sensory environment, and for the first time he was able to meet Santa. So it was a fantastic experience. So obviously at that point you knew Joseph was autistic. So tell us a bit more about your family.
Okay, so I have 2 sons, and Joseph is now 13. He just turned 13 in December, and Noah is 8.5. They're both diagnosed autistic and ADHD. The autism is for me, the ADHD is for my husband. As Joseph was saying the other night, we got the best of both mommy and daddy. And it's, yeah, I think so. And what's interesting is that, they are the same. They come from the same parents. They have the same diagnosis, and they could not be more different. And I think that that's a really important thing for people to realize, is that it's not like being ADHD always means that this is going to happen, or being autistic always means this is going to happen, because every person is different. And so just as every neurotypical person isn't exactly like every other neurotypical person in their behavior, so it is with being neurodivergent. And for the both of them, I describe Joseph as autistic with a healthy helping of ADHD, and Noah as ADHD with a sprinkling of autism. And that's just because for the majority of the time, Joseph is very structured. He has challenges with his executive functioning, and that he really can't make a decision about anything. And so it's overwhelming for him to try to make a decision about anything. And I see where those specific challenges for him are coming down to kind of more needing order in his world. Whereas Noah is just doing this all the time. He's like, you just let an electron loose or something, and he's bouncing all over the place. It's interesting because in the last little bit, he's actually started to create rules for himself in a way that he has never done before, because he's very concerned about coronavirus. So he's created rules for himself around how long he has to wash his hands after using the toilet or after coming in from outside. And he's become very structured in terms of how long you wash your hands, and he's counting out loud. Okay, so this one is a 10-second wash. at 1, 2, 3. And it's interesting because he's never been that structured before. And I'm wondering if as he's getting older, and there are fewer rules and structures imposed upon him, because as you get older, you start to become more determinant of your own time. I think he's needing to put structures in place for himself that he hasn't had to before. So it's actually interesting to watch that. Whereas Joseph has always been very, very structured. There are rules. He used to only eat pizza in America because that was the first place that he had pizza. And so pizza is for America. And he would not eat it here. He would only have it when we were visiting my family. And I think he was 4.5, 5 maybe when that rule came into existence. So it's it's interesting to manage a household full of people who all have a neurodivergent perspective on things, and trying to be respectful of everybody and not lose your cool a lot, because I feel like a lot of the time in trying to make sure that I'm being respectful and taking care of everybody else, that means I have to not acknowledge my own neurodivergence. So a lot of the time, there are times when I think can I just be the autistic one today? Can it be me today? Because I'm really struggling to cope with something. But every parent knows that it's very rarely about you, and you have to kind of suck it up and get on with it.
So with such a sort of neurodiverse family, do you have a house full of visual calendars and things around the kitchen? How do you cope with life?
We used to. So we used to have visual timetables everywhere. Joseph has decided that those are for babies, and so we're trying to come up with a structure that is more manageable for him, that's more written, more like kind of checklist things. Noah does not respond to visual timetables. So what's interesting, like you have these aids, things that they say, okay, this is going to help, this is going to help. It's not, it might help, and you just have to give it a try and hope for the best and see what happens. Mostly with Noah, he responds better to verbal prompts. So we just have to know, and he knows his schedule, and he knows when he's supposed to be doing something, and he will say to you, or you can say to him, it's time for your teeth, and he'll say, okay, and he'll go and get his toothbrush and his toothpaste and bring it back to you, and he knows that process that involves, we can do ah and e so that I can get in all the way around, and then I don't even have to say it to him. I don't have to say anymore ah, e. He knows exactly when he's supposed to move his mouth, because he is actually very structured in that way. But he won't remember to do it unless you say it, and he won't look at a visual timetable, because he wouldn't remember to look at a visual timetable.
That's a reminder that.
So the first thing we have to do every day is take the ADHD medicine. That's the first thing that all 3 of my men have to do every day, because until that medicine kicks in, you're just trying to herd cats. So they need that little bit of focus, that calm that it brings to their mind, and then we can get on with the requirements of the day.
Yeah, but it's a reminder that every child is different, and so strategies need to be tailored for the individual child. I'm conscious of the time, but one question that I would really like to ask you is what you would tell the parents or carers of a child who is diagnosed as autistic or with another neurodiverse condition. What would you say to them?
So the first thing that I would say is a diagnosis is a good thing. It's a good thing, because information about ourselves is never bad, and we need that information. And so much like where I got angry after my own diagnosis because of the lost time and the lost opportunity, what I would say is be glad that you have the information now to work with that, so that you can help your child have the right coping strategies, and so that they can learn now to love themselves. Because I spent 40 years of my life hating myself and hating my inability to do what everybody else could do. And so I think the number one thing is always to acknowledge that diagnosis, be glad for it, and even to celebrate it. So, when Noah got his diagnosis of autism at age 5, we had a party for him, because now he was in the club. So it was a me and Joseph club, and now it's a me and Joseph and Noah club. And Daddy has the ADHD club with them, but I have the autism club with them. And talking about those strengths, what does it bring us? I know lots of parents don't want to tell their child that they've had a diagnosis. And I struggle with that, with understanding that, because I know how impactful it has been to me personally to not have known. And parents are concerned about getting labels for their kids. They're concerned. Oh.
Zoe Cruikshank, if you're on the call, could you just put your camera off? Thank you.
Okay. I know that parents are concerned about their children getting labels or being limited by a diagnosis, but the thing is, they're getting labels anyway. So long before I had the right word of autism, for me, I was weird, and I was, like that girl said, how I was the way I was, as opposed to the way my sister was. So it's not like your children aren't going to know that they're different. They know they're different. So make sure that they have the right words for why they're different, so that they can work with that information. And it also helps to build their self-esteem, so that above all else, mental health is the most important thing to consider with neurodivergent children. Because personally, I can say I started considering suicide when I was 13. I made my first plan to actually go through with it when I was 19. And I didn't have my diagnosis till I was 40. You see, so I already knew that I wasn't getting it. And I just couldn't get in sync. That's all I ever felt. And I felt like, what did it matter if I wasn't here? And autistic kids are, I think, 28 more times more likely to consider or attempt suicide than neurotypical children. So the earlier that we can get in there and be saying to them, there's no reason for you to not like yourself, you're wonderful the way you are. Yes, there are difficulties, but everybody has difficulties, so let's just work out the right strategies. As long as we can be building self-esteem and letting them know that their mental health matters more than anything else, then that's what we should be doing as parents for our neurodivergent children.
Absolutely, and focusing on the strengths is so important for every child.
Yeah. Focusing on the strengths, but also acknowledging, yes, there are challenges. I'm not going to ever say that I'm delighted that my children are autistic, because, oh, isn't it great? It brings challenges. It absolutely brings challenges. But if we know what those challenges are, we can address them. If we try to ignore them, if we try to say, well, there's nothing really to worry about, we're just sweeping stuff under the carpet, and eventually the pile gets too big. You start tripping on it.
Thank you so much, Carrie. That's brought us to the break. I still got loads of questions that I wanted to ask, but I'm going to give other people the opportunity to ask you some things. If you have any questions that you would like to ask Carrie, if you could pop them into the chat box. We'll have a short break, and then we'll come back to the session, and we'll look at any questions from the chat box. If there aren't many, then I can carry on and ask some of the other ones that I've got. So it's 11:31 at the moment. If we could come back for just after 25 to, so 5 minutes, we'll look forward to seeing you back then. Don't leave the call. Just leave your cameras off, and then once we come back after the break, put your cameras back on, and hopefully we can see you and we can ask Carrie any more questions. Thank you very much for attending the first part of today.